The laughter was deafening. In a federal courtroom packed with police officers, a black man sat silently as they mocked him, unaware they were ridiculing the most powerful law enforcement official in America. Officer Bradley Knox led the cruel chorus, his badge gleaming as he pointed and jeered at the defendant. But Elijah Ford wasn't who they thought he was. In moments, their laughter would turn to horror, their mockery to shame, and the entire justice system would be exposed for what it truly was. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment your city below. I want to see how far this truth travels. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the Marcus Federal Building in downtown Atlanta, its golden rays doing nothing to warm the cold marble halls of justice. Inside courtroom 3B, the air hung thick with anticipation and the acrid scent of bad coffee that had been sitting in the hallway dispenser since dawn. It was supposed to be a routine day, another case, another defendant, another guilty verdict to add to the statistics. Officer Bradley Knox adjusted his uniform for the third time that morning, his fingers running along the crisp edges of his collar. 23 years on the force had given him a certain swagger, a confidence that came from knowing exactly where he stood in the hierarchy of power. His salt and pepper hair was trimmed military short, and his jaw carried the perpetual clench of a man who believed the world owed him respect simply for wearing a badge. "You see this guy?" Knox muttered to Officer Derek Chen, nodding toward the defendant's table. "Another one thinking he's above the law." Chen, younger by a decade and still carrying the eagerness of someone trying to prove himself, followed Knox's gaze. At the defendant's table sat a black man in an impeccable charcoal suit, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Everything about him seemed measured, controlled, from the way his hands rested flat on the table to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Elijah Ford, Chen read from his file. Charged with obstruction of justice and interfering with a federal investigation. Knox snorted. "Fancy suit won't save him. I've seen 100 like him think they can talk their way out of anything with big words and expensive lawyers." The courtroom was filling up now. It wasn't just any case that drew this kind of crowd. Word had spread through the precinct that this was going to be good some uppity civilian who'd gotten in the way of a major drug bust, claiming he had authority to intervene. The boys in blue had come out in force to watch him get taken down a peg. Detective Maria Rodriguez took her seat in the third row, her notebook already out. She'd been on the scene that night 3 weeks ago when everything went sideways. The operation had been months in the planning, a coordinated strike on a suspected drug distribution ring operating out of a warehouse in the industrial district. Everything was going perfectly until he showed up. "I still can't believe the balls on this guy," Rodriguez whispered to her partner, Detective James Washington. "Walking into our operation like he owned the place." Washington, a veteran of 30 years, whose knees creaked when he stood, shook his head. "Some people just don't know their place anymore. Think because they wear a suit and speak proper English, they can interfere with real police work." The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Thornton, was arranging her files at the prosecution table. She was known for her ruthless efficiency, her ability to dismantle defendants with surgical precision. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her gray suit was as sharp as her reputation. This case should have been a slam dunk. Multiple officers as witnesses, body cam footage, and a defendant who'd refused to explain himself at the scene. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison Wells," the bailiff announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. Judge Wells entered, his black robes billowing slightly as he walked. At 67, he'd seen enough to know when a case was going to be straightforward. He'd reviewed the evidence the night before, seemed pretty clear-cut. Some civilian had interfered with a federal operation, claimed to have authority he didn't possess, and now would face the consequences. "Be seated," Wells said, settling into his chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this thousands of times. "We're here for case number 2024, CR 4782, United States versus Elijah Ford. Is the prosecution ready? We are, Your Honor." Thornton stood, her voice crisp and confident. "Defense." A young public defender named Marcus Williams rose uncertainly. He'd been assigned the case just 3 days ago when Ford had declined private representation. Ready, Your Honor. Though I would like to note for the record that my client has been uncommonly reticent about his defense strategy. Knox nudged Chen. Public defender, this is going to be a bloodbath. Wells nodded. Noted. Ms. Thornton, you may begin with your opening statement. Thornton moved to the center of the courtroom with the confidence of a predator who knew its prey was cornered. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a clear case of civilian interference with federal law enforcement. On the night of September 15th, my colleagues in law enforcement were conducting a carefully planned operation that had taken months to coordinate. They were about to apprehend key figures in a drug distribution network that has plagued our city for years. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, and then Mr. Ford arrived. Without any legitimate authority, without any right, he walked into an active crime scene and ordered federal officers to stand down. When they rightfully refused, he physically interfered with the arrest, allowing several suspects to escape. The crowd of officers muttered among themselves. Knox's face twisted into a sneer. "Probably working with them," he said loud enough for several rows to hear. "Wouldn't be the first time." Ford remained perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on some point beyond the prosecutor. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, hadn't even blinked at the accusations. There was something unsettling about his stillness, like the calm before a catastrophic storm. The evidence will show. Thornton continued warming to her theme, that Mr. Ford claimed to be a federal agent, but when asked to provide identification, he refused. When ordered to leave the scene, he refused. When placed under arrest, he resisted. This is not a complicated case. This is about a man who thought he was above the law and is now facing the consequences of that arrogance. She returned to her seat satisfied. The officers in the gallery nodded approvingly. This was how it should be. Civilians needed to learn their place. "Mr. Williams," Judge Wells prompted. The young public defender stood slowly adjusting his tie nervously. He'd tried to get Ford to tell him something, anything about why he'd been at that warehouse, but the man had simply said, "Present the evidence as it comes. The truth will reveal itself." "Your Honor, members of the court," Williams began, his voice lacking Thornton's commanding presence. "We don't dispute that Mr. Ford was present at the warehouse on September 15th. We don't dispute that he instructed officers to stand down. What we dispute is the characterization of his actions as criminal." Knox laughed, not bothering to hide it. "What else would you call it?" Wells shot a warning look at the gallery, but said nothing. The atmosphere in the courtroom was becoming increasingly hostile, like a pack of wolves scenting blood. Mr. Ford believed he was acting within his authority, Williams continued, though even he seemed unconvinced by his own words. The circumstances of that night are more complex than the prosecution would have you believe. Complex? Officer Patricia Mills, sitting in the second row, whispered loudly. "What's complex about obstruction?" Williams returned to his seat, perspiration beading on his forehead. He'd done what he could with what he had, which was essentially nothing. "Ms. Thornton, call your first witness," Wells instructed. The prosecution calls Officer Bradley Knox. Knox stood with exaggerated importance, straightening his uniform as he walked to the witness stand. He enjoyed this part, being the voice of authority, the guardian of law and order. He placed his hand on the Bible with theatrical solemnity. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Knox said, his voice carrying the weight of his supposed moral superiority. "Officer Knox," Thornton began, "please tell us about the night of September 15th. Knox leaned back slightly, getting comfortable. He was going to enjoy this. "We'd been planning this operation for 4 months. Had surveillance on the warehouse, knew exactly who was coming and going. We had 12 units ready to move federal agents, local police, even had DEA involved. It was going to be the biggest bust of the year." "And what happened when you arrived at the warehouse?" Knox's jaw tightened. We were in position about to breach when this individual, he pointed at Ford with barely concealed contempt, comes walking up like he owns the place. No uniform, no visible badge, just a suit and an attitude. The gallery murmured appreciatively. They knew the type civilians who watched too many movies and thought they could play cop. What did Mr. Ford say to you? He told us to stand down, said the operation was compromised and we needed to withdraw immediately. Knox laughed bitterly. Can you believe that some random guy in a suit telling federal officers to abandon months of work? How did you respond? I asked for his identification, his authority. He just stood there silent like he was above having to explain himself to us. That's when I knew something was off. Ford's expression hadn't changed, but something in his posture shifted slightly, a subtle straightening of his spine that went unnoticed by everyone except Williams, who found himself oddly unsettled by it. What happened next? Knox was warming to his story, now playing to the crowd. He physically placed himself between us and the entrance, said if we proceeded we'd be making a grave mistake. I've been doing this for over 2 decades, Ms. Thornton. I know obstruction when I see it. Did Mr. Ford claim to be a federal agent? He implied it, but when pressed for credentials, he refused to provide them. That's when we knew we were dealing with someone who was either delusional or working with the suspects. The crowd loved it. Several officers were nodding, some even chuckling. They'd all dealt with civilians who thought they knew better than trained law enforcement. Tell me about the arrest, Thornton prompted. Knox's eyes gleamed. When it became clear he wasn't going to move, I made the decision to arrest him for obstruction. He didn't resist physically, but he said something I'll never forget. What did he say? He looked me right in the eye and said, "You're making a mistake that will end your career." Can you imagine the arrogance? The laughter in the gallery was louder now. Officer Chen was shaking his head in amusement. Rodriguez had written "delusional" in her notebook and underlined it twice. No further questions? Thornton said, satisfied with the performance. William stood for cross-examination, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Officer Knox, did Mr. Ford ever threaten you with violence? No, but did he have a weapon? Not that we could see, but did he actually physically prevent you from entering the warehouse? Knox's face reddened. He stood in our way. But you could have walked around him, couldn't you? That's not the point. Officer Knox, did it occur to you that Mr. Ford might have had information about the operation that you didn't? Knox laughed outright. What could he possibly know that we didn't? We'd been watching that place for months. Williams glanced at Ford, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. What if I told you that the warehouse had been rigged with explosives? The laughter stopped abruptly. Knox blinked. What if Mr. Ford knew something about the operation that made it dangerous to proceed? Thornton stood. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation? Sustained. Well said, though he looked curious now. Williams retreated. No further questions. As Knox returned to his seat, the mood in the gallery had shifted slightly. The laughter was more subdued, uncertain. The prosecution calls Detective Maria Rodriguez. Rodriguez took the stand with professional efficiency. She'd testified dozens of times and knew how to present herself confident, but not cocky authoritative, but relatable. Detective Rodriguez, Thornton began. You were part of the surveillance team for this operation, correct? Yes, ma'am. I'd been watching the warehouse for 6 weeks. Tell us about Mr. Ford's arrival. Rodriguez glanced at Ford, then back to Thornton. He came out of nowhere. 1 minute we're getting ready to breach, the next this guy appears like a ghost. No vehicle that we saw, just walking up to the warehouse like he had an appointment. Did his behavior seem suspicious? Everything about it was suspicious. The timing, the way he carried himself, the fact that he knew we were there, we were supposed to be concealed, but he walked straight to Officer Knox like he knew exactly where to find him. The gallery was paying close attention now. This was getting interesting. Did you interact with Mr. Ford directly? Briefly. After Knox decided to arrest him, I approached to assist. That's when things got really strange. How so? Rodriguez hesitated, something flickering across her face. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. He knew my name. I'd never met him before, never seen him, but he called me by name. And not just my name, he knew about my daughter, asked how Sophia was doing at Georgetown. The courtroom went silent. Even Knox looked unsettled. How could he have known that? Thornton asked, though she seemed less confident now. I don't know. Sophia's enrollment isn't public knowledge. It's not on social media. The only people who know are family and... Rodriguez trailed off. And who? And people with very high security clearance. Thornton quickly moved on. But he still didn't provide identification. No, ma'am. No further questions. Williams stood slowly. Detective Rodriguez, when Mr. Ford mentioned your daughter, did he threaten her in any way? No, Rodriguez admitted. Actually, he said he was proud of her academic achievements. Like someone who had read her file. Objection, Thornton said quickly. Withdrawn, Williams said, but the seed was planted. The prosecution called 3 more officers, each telling essentially the same story, but with increasing unease. Officer Chen mentioned that Ford had known about his recent commendation, one that hadn't been publicly announced yet. Officer Mills testified that Ford had asked about her mother's cancer treatment, something she'd only discussed with her captain and HR. By the time the prosecution rested, the atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. The laughter was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Who was this man who knew so much about them? Mr. Williams, are you ready to present your defense? Judge Wells asked. Williams stood glancing at Ford, who remained perfectly still. Your Honor, the defense calls Elijah Ford. Ford rose with fluid grace, every movement deliberate and controlled. As he walked to the witness stand, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. There was something about him and presence that seemed to fill the room, making it feel smaller, more confined. He placed his hand on the Bible, and when he spoke for the first time, his voice was deep resonant, carrying an authority that made everyone sit up straighter. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Williams approached nervously. Mr. Ford, please tell the court about the night of September 15th. Ford was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes scanning the gallery, taking in every face, every badge, every smirk that still lingered on some faces. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured. I arrived at the warehouse at 11:47 p.m. The operation was scheduled to begin at midnight. I instructed Officer Knox and his team to stand down because proceeding would have resulted in the deaths of every officer present. The courtroom erupted. Thornton was on her feet. Objection. The defendant is making unsubstantiated claims. I can substantiate them, Ford said quietly, but his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Wells banged his gavel. Order, Mr. Ford, you need to provide evidence for such claims. Ford reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately. Every officer in the room tensed hands, moving instinctively toward their weapons. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon, it was a phone. He pressed a few buttons, and suddenly the courtroom's screens typically used for evidence display flickered to life. What is this? Wells demanded. Surveillance footage from inside the warehouse, Your Honor. Timestamp September 15th, 11:52 p.m. The grainy footage showed the interior of the warehouse. At first it looked normal, crates, shadows, nothing unusual. Then the camera panned, and everyone saw them, dozens of barrels marked with hazmat symbols, and more concerning wires running between them. The drug dealers knew you were coming, Ford said, his voice filling the silent courtroom. They'd been tipped off 3 days before. The entire warehouse was rigged to explode the moment your team breached. Estimated casualties 37 officers plus civilian collateral in a 3-block radius. Knox's face had gone pale. That's impossible. How could you know? Because Officer Knox Ford said, turning those penetrating eyes on him, "It's my job to know." Williams, finding his courage, asked, "Mr. Ford, who are you exactly?" Ford was quiet again, letting the tension build. Around the room, phones were starting to buzz. Officers were checking messages, their faces changing from confusion to shock to something approaching terror. Detective Washington's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, then dropped it, his hands shaking. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Mr. Ford." Williams repeated, though his voice was trembling now. "Who are you?" Ford reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a leather wallet. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and held it up for the entire courtroom to see. The badge gleamed gold in the fluorescent lights, the eagle at the top, the scales of justice, the words that made every law enforcement officer in the room feel their world tilt off its axis. Federal Bureau of Investigation Director. "My name is Elijah Ford," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent courtroom. "I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that comes when reality breaks, when everything you thought you knew proves to be wrong. Knox's mouth was open, no sound coming out. Rodriguez had gone pale, her hand covering her mouth. Chen looked like he might be sick. "That's..." Thornton stammered. "That's not possible. The director of the FBI is..." "Appointed 3 months ago," Ford finished. "After my predecessor's retirement. It was kept quiet for operational security. The ceremony was private, the announcement delayed." He turned to look at the gallery of officers. "You wouldn't have known unless you needed to know. And until now, you didn't need to know." Judge Wells's gavel fell from his hand, clattering on the bench. This court needs to verify." Ford pulled out his phone again, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. After 2 rings, a voice everyone recognized answered, the Attorney General of the United States. "Director Ford, I understand there's been a situation." "Yes, sir. I'm in federal court in Atlanta. Judge Harrison Wells presiding. There seems to be some confusion about my identity." Judge Wells. "This is Attorney General Patterson. I can confirm that Elijah Ford is indeed the director of the FBI. He was operating under my direct authority on the night in question. The operation those officers were about to conduct had been compromised by a leak in their department. Director Ford's intervention saved dozens of lives." The phone went dead. Ford put it away calmly, as if he hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of the courtroom. Knox was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. We arrested the director of the FBI." "You did more than that," Ford said, and now there was steel in his voice. "You mocked me. You laughed. You made assumptions based on the color of my skin and your own prejudices. You decided I was guilty before you knew a single fact about me." He stood from the witness stand, and though he made no threatening moves, everyone seemed to shrink back. "Officer Knox, you've been on the force for 23 years. In that time, you've had 47 excessive force complaints, 12 of which involved black suspects, who were later found to be innocent. You thought that information was sealed, didn't you?" Knox's face went from pale to bright red. "How?" "Detective Rodriguez, you're a good cop. But you've remained silent about misconduct you've witnessed 14 times in the last 5 years. Your silence made you complicit." Rodriguez looked like she'd been slapped. Ford continued, his voice never rising, but somehow filling every corner of the room. "Officer Chen, you've been falsifying overtime reports for 6 months. Officer Mills, you've been leaking information to the press for money. Detective Washington, you've been using your badge to intimidate your ex-wife's new partner." Each accusation landed like a physical blow. The officers named looked stricken, terrified. "Every single one of you," Ford said, addressing the entire gallery, "came here today to watch what you thought would be another black man being put in his place by the system. You came here to laugh, to mock, to feel superior. And not one of you, not one, questioned whether you might be wrong." He turned to Judge Wells. "Your Honor." I could have identified myself at any point. I could have avoided this entire trial, but I needed to see something for myself. I needed to see how deep the rot goes. Wells found his voice, though it shook. Director Ford, this court, we had no way of knowing. That's exactly the point, Ford interrupted. You had no way of knowing who I was, so you treated me the way you treat every black defendant who comes through these doors. The only difference is that I have the power to do something about it. He walked back to the defendant's table, picked up a briefcase that had been sitting there the entire time. When he opened it, the assembled officers could see files, hundreds of them. Each one with a name, a badge number, a record of misconduct. The real investigation, Ford said, wasn't about drug dealers in a warehouse. It was about corruption in law enforcement. And every single one of you who laughed today, who mocked me, who assumed my guilt, you've just made my job much easier. Thornton finally found her voice. Director Ford, surely you understand we were just doing our jobs. Were you? Ford asked, turning those piercing eyes on her. Or were you enjoying the show? I heard you, Ms. Thornton, in the hallway before the trial, telling your colleague that this would be, what was the phrase, another thugs get what's coming case. Thornton's face drained of color. I've been director for 3 months, Ford continued, and in that time I've been building cases. Officer Knox, you should expect federal agents at your home within the hour. Detective Washington, same for you. In fact, he looked around the room. 17 of you will be arrested before the day is out. The courtroom erupted. Officers were standing, some trying to leave, others pulling out phones. Wells was banging his gavel, trying to restore order, but it was chaos. Through it all, Ford remained calm, still the eye of the storm. When the noise finally died down, he spoke again. You want to know the real irony, he said. The drug dealers in that warehouse, they're small time, street level. The real criminals, the ones destroying our communities, they wear badges. They sit in courtrooms. They hide behind the law while breaking it every single day. He looked at Knox, who had sunk back into his seat, looking like a man watching his life crumble. You asked me for my identification that night, Officer Knox. I didn't show it because I wanted to see what you would do when you thought I was just another black man in your way. And you showed me exactly who you are. Ford closed the briefcase, the sound echoing in the silent courtroom. This trial is over, Your Honor. The federal government is withdrawing all charges, obviously. But the real trials, those are just beginning. He turned to Williams, the young public defender who had tried to defend him with no information, no help. Counselor, you did your best with an impossible situation. You're going to make a good lawyer. Then louder to the room. He's the only one in this entire courtroom who treated me with the presumption of innocence. Remember that. Ford started walking toward the exit. As he passed the gallery, officers pulled back as if he were radioactive. Some were crying. Others were on their phones desperately calling lawyers. The weight of what had just happened, what was about to happen, was crushing them. At the door, Ford stopped and turned back one more time. You know what the saddest part is? If I had been just another black man, just another defendant, you would have convicted me. You would have sent an innocent man to prison and gone home feeling good about yourselves. That's the system we have. That's the system I'm going to change. Knox, in a moment of desperate bravado, stood up. You can't prove anything. Those complaints were dismissed. You're on a witch hunt because we embarrassed you. Ford smiled then, and it was the coldest thing anyone in that room had ever seen. Officer Knox, I don't get embarrassed. I get evidence. And speaking of evidence, he pulled out his phone one more time, pressed play. Knox's voice filled the courtroom, but it wasn't from today. It was from 3 weeks ago, the night of the warehouse incident captured on Ford's own recording device. I don't care if he's federal. You see his skin. Just another knockwood thinking he's somebody. We'll teach him his place. The word hung in the air like poison. Several officers gasped. Rodriguez closed her eyes, knowing it was over. Knox's career, his pension, his freedom, all gone in an instant. That's... Knox stammered. That's taken out of context. Is it? Ford asked. Would you like me to play the next 12 minutes? The part where you and 4 other officers discussed what you'd like to do to me. The part where you used that word 17 more times. Knox collapsed back into his seat, his face gray. I've been recording every interaction since I became director, Ford said. Every conversation where officers thought they were safe to show their true selves. Every moment of casual racism, every instance of corruption, every time you thought you were above the law. He looked around the room one last time. You came here today to watch a black man fall. Instead, you're watching your own empire crumble. And unlike you, I don't find it funny at all. I find it necessary. As Ford reached for the door handle, Judge Wells found his voice one more time. Director Ford, wait, please. Ford paused, but didn't turn around. How many? Wells asked. How many officers, judges, prosecutors? How many are you investigating? Ford turned his head slightly, just enough for them to see his profile. All of them, Your Honor. Every single one who forgot that justice is supposed to be blind. Every single one who used their power to oppress rather than protect. Every single one who laughed today when they thought I was powerless. He opened the door, and they could see federal agents waiting in the hallway, dozens of them all wearing FBI windbreakers, all waiting for his signal. The warehouse wasn't the operation, Ford said, his final words carrying back to them. This was the operation, and it's just beginning. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded like thunder in the silent courtroom. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then Knox let out a sound that was part sob, part scream, and the room exploded into chaos. Officers were fleeing, pushing past each other to get to the exits, only to find federal agents blocking their way. Those with guilty consciences were desperately trying to delete messages from their phones, not realizing it was far too late. The innocent few stood frozen, watching their world collapse around them. Williams, the young public defender, remained seated at the defense table, staring at the spot where Ford had sat. He'd defended a legend without knowing it had stood up for someone who could have destroyed him with a word, but instead had praised him. It was a lesson he'd never forget. Thornton was on her phone with her supervisor, her voice high and panicked, trying to explain how she couldn't have known how none of them could have known. But even as she spoke, she knew it was pointless. Ford was right. They should have treated him with the presumption of innocence, regardless of who he was. That was the job. That was the oath they'd all taken. Judge Wells remained on the bench, his gavel forgotten, staring at the door Ford had walked through. In 30 years on the bench, he'd never felt smaller, never felt more exposed. Every dismissive judgment, every time he'd given an officer the benefit of the doubt over a defendant, every moment of bias, it all came crashing down on him. The federal agents began entering the courtroom, their movements precise, professional. They knew exactly who they were there for. The lead agent, a tall woman with steel gray hair, approached the bench. Judge Wells, we'll need you to come with us. You're not under arrest at this time, but Director Ford wants to speak with you. Wells nodded numbly, standing on shaking legs. As he was escorted out, he passed Knox, who was being read his rights by two agents. The officer, who had started the day with such confidence, such arrogance, was now sobbing like a child begging for mercy that wouldn't come. Rodriguez was also in custody, though she held her head high. She'd known this day might come, had known her silence made her complicit. In a way, she was almost relieved. The weight of those secrets had been crushing her for years. Chen was arguing with the agents arresting him, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that falsifying overtime wasn't a federal crime. The agent arresting him patiently explained that it was when it involved federal grant money, which his department had been receiving. Mills had tried to run, making it all of 10 feet before being tackled by an agent half her age. The press contacts in her phone would be evidence now, the money she'd received, traced and documented. Her press sources would be investigated too. Ford was thorough. Washington had given up without a fight, seeming almost resigned. He'd known he was crossing lines, using his badge for personal vendettas. The shame on his face was complete. But it wasn't just the guilty being processed. Several officers who had simply come to watch, to laugh, to be part of the mob, were being questioned. their names taken, their conduct under review. The message was clear: participating in injustice, even as a bystander, had consequences. Outside the courthouse, news vans were already arriving. Someone had leaked the story, probably one of the officers trying to get ahead of it. FBI director arrested by local police would be the headline, followed quickly by massive corruption probe launched. In the hallway, Ford stood watching as his agents worked. His assistant special agent Patricia Morse approached with a tablet. "Sir, we have confirmation on all primary targets. 17 arrests so far, with more to come as we process the evidence." Ford nodded. "And the warehouse? Bomb squad cleared it last night after you provided the intel. The dealers were using it as bait, hoping to take out as many cops as possible in retaliation for the Southside raids last month." "So I did save their lives," Ford said quietly. "Yes, sir. They just didn't know it." Ford was quiet for a moment, watching as Knox was led past in handcuffs. The officer caught his eye, and for a moment, Ford saw something beyond the racism and corruption. He saw fear, genuine terror at what his life had become in the span of an hour. "Sir," Morse prompted, "what are your orders regarding the officers who weren't directly involved in corruption? The ones who just came to watch?" Ford considered this. "Mandatory sensitivity training, federal oversight for 5 years, and each one writes a 10-page essay on the presumption of innocence and why it matters." "That's lenient, sir." "Is it?" Ford asked. "They'll have to live with the knowledge that they stood by and laughed while injustice was happening right in front of them. They'll have to face their communities knowing everyone will remember their behavior today." Sometimes, Agent Morse, the worst punishment isn't prison. It's having to look at yourself in the mirror and acknowledge what you've become. As the last of the arrested officers were led away, Ford noticed someone standing at the end of the hallway. It was Williams, the public defender, looking uncertain and small. Ford walked over to him. Up close, Williams could see the exhaustion in the director's eyes, the weight of what he'd just done. "You did well in there, counselor," Ford said. "I didn't do anything," Williams replied. "I didn't even know who you were." "Exactly," Ford said. "You didn't know who I was, but you still defended me. You still presumed my innocence. You still did your job. That's more than anyone else in that courtroom can say." Williams swallowed hard. "What happens now?" Ford looked back at the courtroom, now empty, except for federal agents collecting evidence. "Now we rebuild. Now we find officers who remember why they put on the badge in the first place. Now we create a system where justice really is blind." "Will it work?" Ford was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but what I saw in that courtroom today, the laughing, the mockery, the assumption of guilt based on nothing but skin color that can't continue. It ends now one way or another." As Ford turned to leave, Williams called out, "Director Ford?" Ford paused. "Why didn't you just identify yourself from the beginning? Why go through all this?" Ford smiled, but it was sad. "Because, Mr. Williams, if I had walked in there and immediately announced who I was, they would have apologized, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, and nothing would have changed. They needed to show me who they really were when they thought I was powerless, and they did." He started walking away, then stopped one more time. "You know the real tragedy, counselor. I've been director for 3 months. In that time, I've reviewed thousands of cases, and this scene. What happened in that courtroom today, it happens every single day across this country. The only difference is that usually the defendant really is powerless to stop it." Williams watched as Ford disappeared around the corner, flanked by his agents. The hallway felt eerily quiet, now the echoes of the morning's chaos fading into memory. But Williams knew that the repercussions of what had happened in courtroom 3B would resonate for years. Back in the now empty courtroom, a janitor entered to clean up. He'd heard the commotion, seen the arrests, watched the mighty fall. He'd been working in this courthouse for 15 years, had seen countless trials, countless defendants, countless moments of injustice that everyone pretended were justice. He looked at the defendant's chair where Ford had sat patient and silent while they mocked him. There was something poetic about it, he thought. All those officers had come to see a black man put in his place, and in the end, that's exactly what happened, just not the way they expected. As he cleaned, he found something on the floor, Knox's badge fallen from his uniform during the arrest. The janitor picked it up, studied it. "To protect and serve," it read. He shook his head and tossed it in his trash bin. It landed with a hollow clang that echoed through the empty room. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware that in one courtroom on one morning, the entire landscape of law enforcement had shifted. The newspapers would tell the story, the investigations would continue for months, maybe years. Officers across the country would wonder if they were next, if their casual racism and minor corruptions were about to catch up with them. But in that moment, in that empty courtroom, there was only silence, and the ghost of Ford's final words, "This was the operation, and it's just beginning." The sun had climbed higher now, its light streaming through the windows, differently illuminating the spaces where shadows had been. It was the same room, the same building, the same city. But everything had changed. The laughter that had filled the courtroom that morning would never echo here again without the memory of its consequences. The justice system had been put on trial by the very man they'd tried to prosecute, and it had been found guilty. The news broke like a thunderclap across the nation. Within an hour of Ford walking out of that courtroom, every major network had interrupted their regular programming. The footage was grainy, captured on someone's phone from the gallery, but it was enough the moment when Ford held up his FBI director's badge. The collective gasp, Knox's face crumbling from arrogance to terror. In Washington, D.C., the Attorney General's office was in crisis mode. Patricia Patterson sat behind her mahogany desk, surrounded by advisors, all of them trying to figure out how to manage the fallout. Her confirmation of Ford's identity over the phone had been necessary, but had also opened floodgates they weren't quite ready for. He was supposed to wait. Deputy Attorney General Michael Reeves said, pacing back and forth. The operation wasn't scheduled to go public for another month. Patterson rubbed her temples. Elijah Ford doesn't wait. That's why we appointed him. He sees an opportunity, he takes it. But the exposure is exactly what we need, Patterson interrupted. Do you know how many cases we've had thrown out because of police misconduct? How many communities have lost faith in law enforcement? Ford just showed the entire country what we're dealing with. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the president. "Yes, Mr. President," she answered, putting it on speaker for her team to hear. "Patricia, I'm watching the news. Tell me Ford hasn't gone rogue." "No, sir. He's executing the plan, just accelerated the timeline." There was a pause. "How bad is it?" 17 arrests so far, with more coming. We're looking at potentially hundreds of officers across multiple states. Christ. And Ford is in complete control, Mr. President. He knew exactly what he was doing when he walked into that courtroom. Another pause, longer this time. "Keep me updated. And Patricia, make sure Ford understands that with great power comes great scrutiny. He's opened Pandora's box." The line went dead. Patterson looked at her team. "You heard him. We're backing Ford's play, but we need to manage this carefully." Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Ford had returned to the FBI field office, a gleaming building that stood like a fortress of justice in the heart of the city. His team had assembled in the main conference room, 20 of his most trusted agents, all hand-picked for this operation. "Status report," Ford commanded as he entered, his presence immediately commanding attention. Special Agent Janet Torres stood first. "Sir, we've processed all 17 initial arrests. Knox is invoking his right to remain silent, but we have enough evidence to proceed without his cooperation. The recording you made is particularly damning." "And the others?" Chen broke after an hour. "He's willing to testify about the overtime fraud scheme. Apparently it goes higher than we thought. Captain Morrison was taking a cut." Ford nodded, unsurprised. "Rodriguez?" "She's complicated," Agent David Kim reported. "She's admitted to witnessing misconduct but claims she tried to report it through proper channels and was shut down. We're verifying her story. If it's true, we treat her as a whistleblower, not a perpetrator, Ford said firmly. We need officers who are willing to come forward. The door opened, and Agent Morse entered with a tablet. Sir, you need to see this. She handed him the device, which showed a live feed from outside the Atlanta Police Department headquarters. Hundreds of officers had gathered, some in uniform, some not. They were angry, shouting, holding signs that read, "Witch Hunt," and "Ford must go." But there was another crowd, too. Civilians, predominantly black and brown faces, holding their own signs, "Finally Justice," and "We told you so." It's like this in 12 cities, Morse said quietly. Your actions today have sparked something. Ford studied the screen, his expression unreadable. Let them protest. It's their right. But monitor the situation. If anyone crosses the line into violence or threats, we respond immediately. Sir, Agent Torres interjected. There's something else. We've received over 300 calls in the last hour from officers wanting to report misconduct in their departments. They're asking for protection immunity deals. Set up a hotline, Ford ordered. Anyone who comes forward voluntarily gets consideration, but they need to bring evidence, not just accusations. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but you've just started a war you can't finish. Ford showed it to Morse. Trace this. Already on it, sir. As Morse worked, Ford walked to the window looking out at the city below. Atlanta sprawled before him, a city with a complicated history of race and justice, now at the center of a national reckoning. Sir, Agent Kim said, approaching carefully. There's been a development with Judge Wells. Ford turned. What kind of development? He's requesting a meeting with you. Says he has information about judicial corruption that goes back 20 years. Ford considered this. Wells had been part of the system for decades. If he was willing to talk. Bring him in. Full immunity deal on the table if his information proves valuable. Sir, are you sure he was part of... Everyone gets a chance at redemption, Agent Kim. Even those who've been part of the problem. Sometimes, especially them, they know where all the bodies are buried. 3 hours later, Judge Harrison Wells sat across from Ford in an interrogation room that felt more like a confession booth. The judge looked older than his 67 years, the weight of his choices etched in every line on his face. I've been a judge for 30 years. Wells began, his voice barely above a whisper. And in that time, I've seen things, done things, that I knew were wrong. Ford remained silent, letting the man speak. It starts small, Wells continued. You give an officer the benefit of the doubt even when the evidence is questionable. You accept their testimony over a defendant's even when there are inconsistencies. You tell yourself it's for the greater good that these officers are the thin blue line protecting society. And then, Wells laughed bitterly. Then it becomes routine. Prosecutors know which judges will side with police. Defense attorneys know which courtrooms to avoid. It becomes a system within the system, and if you're part of it, you prosper. If you're not, you get pushed out. Or worse, Wells said, meeting Ford's eyes for the first time. Judge Patricia Brennan tried to stand up to it 5 years ago. Started asking too many questions, demanding body cam footage that mysteriously disappeared. She's not a judge anymore. They found cocaine in her car, cocaine that I know for a fact was planted. Ford leaned forward. You know this for a fact. Because Captain Morrison bragged about it at a poker game, said she needed to learn her place. The same Morrison who was taking cuts from the overtime fraud. Wells nodded. He's been dirty for 15 years, but he's protected. Has connections all the way to the state attorney general's office. Had connections, Ford corrected. Morrison was arrested an hour ago. Wells's eyes widened. You got him. Chen gave him up, but I need more. I need names, dates, specific cases where justice was perverted. Wells was quiet for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket. Ford's agents tensed, but Wells just pulled out a flash drive. I started keeping records 10 years ago. Insurance, I told myself. But really, I think I was hoping someone like you would come along. Someone with the power and the will to actually do something. Ford took the drive, handed it to Agent Torres. What's on it? Everything, Wells said. Every fixed case, every bribed official, every time evidence was suppressed or manufactured. Names, dates, amounts. A decade of corruption documented. Why didn't you come forward before? Wells's shoulders slumped. Because I was part of it. Because I was a coward. Because I told myself that partial justice was better than no justice. I was wrong. Ford studied the older man for a long moment. Your cooperation will be taken into consideration, but you will face consequences for your actions. I know, Wells said. I'm ready. I want to help fix what I helped break. As Wells was led away to continue his debriefing with other agents, Ford's phone rang. It was the FBI director of the Los Angeles field office. Director Ford, we have a situation here. LAPD is refusing to cooperate with our investigation. They're claiming jurisdiction issues. Is that so? Ford's voice was dangerously quiet. Put their chief on the phone. There was shuffling muffled voices, then a gruff voice came on the line. This is Chief Raymond Stark. I don't appreciate federal overreach in my city. Chief Stark, Ford interrupted. You have two choices. You can cooperate fully with our investigation, or I can have federal agents at every LAPD precinct within the hour with warrants for everything from your personnel files to your personal communications. Your choice. You can't threaten. I'm not threatening, Chief. I'm informing you of consequences. You have 30 seconds to decide. The silence stretched for 20 seconds before Stark spoke again, his voice deflated. What do you need? Full cooperation. All files, all records. And Chief, I know about the Riverside incident, the one you thought was buried. Cooperation now might mean leniency later. The line went dead. Ford handed the phone back to Morse, who was staring at him with something approaching awe. How do you know about all these incidents? She asked. 3 months of preparation, Ford replied. Every night, while they were sleeping comfortable in their corruption, I was reading files, connecting dots, building networks of information. They thought the system protected them. They were wrong. The system just needed someone willing to use it against them. The door burst open. Agent Torres rushed in, her face flushed with urgency. Sir, we have a problem. Knox is dead. Ford was on his feet instantly. What happened? Suicide. Somehow got hold of a weapon in holding. We're investigating how... It wasn't suicide, Ford said with certainty. Knox was a survivor too arrogant to kill himself. Someone silenced him. But how he was in federal custody? The corruption runs deeper than we thought, Ford said, his mind already working through possibilities. Lock down the facility. No one in or out. Everyone who had access to Knox in the last 3 hours gets polygraphed. Torres, I want video footage of every second from when he was brought in until he died. As his team scrambled to execute his orders, Ford walked back to the window. The protests outside had grown larger, more volatile. Police supporters on one side, reform advocates on the other, separated by a thin line of federal agents. It was a microcosm of the country, divided, angry, desperate for justice, but unable to agree on what that meant. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number, but this time, it was a call. Ford answered. Director Ford. A disguised voice said, You've made a serious mistake. Knox was just the beginning. Back off, or more will die. Who is this? Someone who knows how deep this goes. Someone who knows about your family. Ford's blood chilled, but his voice remained steady. My family is off limits. Nothing is off limits in war, Director. And you've declared war on people who have been preparing for this moment for decades. Walk away or lose everything. The line went dead. Ford immediately dialed another number. This is Director Ford. I need a protection detail on my family immediately. Full surveillance safe house if necessary. As he gave orders, his mind raced. He'd expected resistance, but this was organized, sophisticated. Someone with resources and reach was fighting back. Agent Kim appeared at his elbow. "Sir, we found something on the Wells Drive." "What is it?" "References to something called the Brotherhood. Appears to be an organization within law enforcement, like a secret society. Wells's notes indicate they have members in federal agencies too." Ford took the tablet, reading quickly. Names, meeting places, coded communications. It was bigger than he'd imagined, not just corruption, but an organized network designed to maintain power and protect its members. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "Sir, we're not just fighting individual corruption. We're fighting an organization. They killed Knox to protect themselves, and they'll kill others. What do we do?" Ford looked at his team. Saw the fear and determination in their faces. These were good agents, clean agents, the ones he'd personally vetted and trusted. "We do what they don't expect," he said. "We accelerate. Every operation we had planned for the next month we execute now. Hit them before they can organize further." "Sir, that's hundreds of arrests across dozens of cities." "Then we'd better get started." The room erupted into controlled chaos as agents began making calls, coordinating with field offices across the country. Ford stood in the center of it all, the eye of the hurricane he'd created. His phone rang again. This time, it was the president himself. "Ford, what the hell is happening? I'm getting calls from governors, mayors, police unions." "Mr. President, we've uncovered an organization within law enforcement called the Brotherhood. They're responsible for systemic corruption across multiple states. Knox was murdered to keep him quiet." Silence. Then, "How deep does this go?" "I don't know yet, but deep enough that they felt comfortable threatening my family." "Your family is safe." "They will be." "Elijah, I backed you because I believed you could reform the system. But if this turns into a civil war within law enforcement—" "It won't," Ford said firmly. "Because we're going to win it quickly and decisively. Mr. President, I need your full support. No wavering, no backing down. They're counting on political pressure to stop us." Another pause. "You have it. But Ford, don't let this become about revenge." "It's not about revenge, Mr. President. It's about justice. The kind that's been denied to too many for too long." After the president hung up, Ford turned to find Agent Morse waiting with a laptop. "Sir, you need to see this. Someone leaked body cam footage from the night at the warehouse." Ford watched the footage, saw himself standing between Knox and the warehouse entrance. But this had been edited, made to look like he was protecting the criminals inside rather than the officers outside. The comments below were vicious, racist, calling for his removal, some even calling for worse. "They're trying to control the narrative," Morse said. "Then we take it back," Ford replied. "Release the full footage, all of it, including the bomb squad's report on the explosives they found. Sir, that will reveal operational methods. Transparency, Agent Morse. It's the only weapon they can't fight." As Morse worked to release the footage, Ford's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter Alicia, away at Howard University. "Dad, there are reporters here. They're asking about you. I'm scared." Ford's jaw tightened. They'd crossed the line. He called his daughter immediately. "Alicia, listen to me. Federal agents are on their way to you right now. Go to your dean's office and wait there." "Dad, what's happening? The news is saying you're attacking police." "I'm doing my job, sweetheart, and some people don't like that. But you're going to be safe, I promise. The other students are saying you're a hero, that you're finally standing up to them." "I'm not a hero, Alicia. I'm just someone who was in a position to do something and chose to do it." "I'm proud of you, Dad." Those 4 words hit Ford harder than any threat could. "I love you, baby. The agents will be there in 5 minutes." As he hung up, Agent Torres approached with a tablet showing breaking news. "Sir, officers in Chicago are walking off the job in protest. They're calling it the Blue Flu. Let them walk, Ford said. We'll federalize law enforcement temporarily if we have to. This isn't the first time this has been done. The mayor is requesting National Guard support. Grant it. And Torres start reaching out to retired officers, the ones who left because they couldn't stomach the corruption. Tell them we need them. The next few hours were a blur of decisions, orders, and revelations. The data from Wells's drive was proving to be a goldmine, but also a nightmare. The corruption was systemic, organized, and reached into unexpected places. City councilors, state legislators, even a few federal judges were implicated. As night fell over Atlanta, Ford stood in his office looking at a map of the United States covered in red pins, each one representing a confirmed member of the Brotherhood. There were hundreds, possibly thousands more unknown. Agent Kim knocked and entered. Sir Judge Wells has given us something else. The location of the Brotherhood's next meeting. It's tomorrow night in an abandoned warehouse in Birmingham. Ford turned his eyes sharp. How many? Based on Wells's information, at least 50 high-ranking members. They're gathering to coordinate their response to today's events. Then we'll be there to greet them. Sir, it could be a trap. Everything could be a trap, Agent Kim. But sometimes you have to spring the trap to catch the ones who set it. His phone rang. It was his wife, Monica, calling from the safe house. Elijah, I saw the news. Are you okay? I'm fine. Don't lie to me. I've been married to you for 25 years. I know when you're carrying the weight of the world. Ford's shoulders sagged slightly. It's bigger than I thought, Monica. The corruption, the organization, they've been operating for decades. But you're going to stop them. I'm going to try. No, Monica said firmly. You're going to stop them. Because that's who you are. The man who does what's right, even when it's hard. Even when it's dangerous. That's the man I married. That's the father our children look up to. They threatened you, threatened Alicia. And we're safe. You made sure of that. Now finish what you started. After saying goodbye to his wife, Ford called his core team together. 20 agents, the ones he trusted, absolutely. Tomorrow night we have a chance to cut the head off this snake. He began outlining the Birmingham operation. It's dangerous, probably a trap, but it's also an opportunity we can't pass up. What's the plan, sir? Torres asked. We go in hard and fast. Full tactical gear, overwhelming force. But more importantly, we go in recording everything. Every word, every face, every moment. The Brotherhood has survived by staying in the shadows. We're going to drag them into the light. Agent Morse raised a hand. Sir, what about the political fallout? If we arrest 50 high-ranking law enforcement officials. Then we arrest 50 high-ranking law enforcement officials, Ford said simply. The law applies to everyone, or it applies to no one. As his team dispersed to prepare, Ford remained in the conference room studying the intelligence they'd gathered. The Brotherhood had tentacles everywhere, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd become comfortable, complacent, believing their power structure was unassailable. They were about to learn otherwise. The door opened and a young analyst rushed in. Director Ford, we've decrypted more of the communications from Wells's drive. Sir, you need to see this. Ford took the tablet, read the decoded message, and felt his blood chill. The Brotherhood wasn't just about maintaining power and protecting corrupt cops. They had a larger agenda, a plan to systematically target and eliminate reform-minded officials, community activists, and anyone else who threatened their control. There was a list of names. Future targets. Some were politicians, some were journalists, some were ordinary citizens who'd spoken out against police brutality. But at the top of the list, circled in red, was a name that made Ford's heart stop. Alicia Ford. His daughter wasn't being threatened to get to him. She was a target herself, identified as a student activist who'd organized protests against police violence on her campus. Ford's phone rang. Unknown number. Did you get our message, Director? the disguised voice asked. "If you touch her." "We won't have to if you stop now. Walk away, Ford. Resign, cite health reasons, whatever you want. But stop this crusade, or the list becomes active. You're threatening innocent citizens. We're protecting order. You're the one creating chaos." Knox was weak, talked too much. But others won't be. Others understand what's at stake. "What's at stake is the rule of law." The voice laughed. "The rule of law. We are the law. We've been the law for longer than you've been alive. You think your little investigation will change that? You think arresting a few dozen officers will matter? We're everywhere, Ford. In every department, every courthouse, every level of government. You can't win." "Watch me," Ford said, and hung up. He immediately called Morse. "Double the protection on my family, and I want protection details on everyone on that list. Every single name." "Sir, that's over 100 people." "Then we'd better get started." As the night wore on, Ford's office became a war room. Maps, photos, documents covered every surface. The Birmingham operation was planned down to the minute, but Ford knew it was just the beginning. The Brotherhood had revealed themselves, shown their hand. They were more dangerous than he'd imagined, but they were also vulnerable, now exposed. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, Ford walked through the empty halls of the FBI building. He found himself in front of a portrait of J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau's controversial first director. "You would have hated me," Ford said quietly to the painting. "A black man running your FBI, tearing down the power structures you helped build. But here's the thing, this isn't your FBI anymore. It's America's FBI, and it's time it acted like it." His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown sender, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a single word, help, followed by an address in Birmingham. And a name, Detective Sarah Chen, Derek Chen's sister, also a cop, also in Birmingham. Ford called Kim immediately. "We might have someone on the inside. Get me everything on Detective Sarah Chen, Birmingham PD." As dawn approached, painting the Atlanta sky in shades of orange and pink, Ford stood at his window again. The protests had died down, but the tension remained electric in the air. The entire country was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. His phone rang. It was the Attorney General. "Elijah, are you ready for Birmingham?" "As ready as we can be." "The President wants to know if you need military support." "No. This needs to be law enforcement cleaning its own house. Bringing in the military sends the wrong message." "And if it goes wrong?" Ford was quiet for a moment. "Then it goes wrong. But we can't govern based on fear of failure. That's how we got into this mess in the first place." Patterson ended the call, and Ford turned to his assembled team. They were loading into unmarked vans, checking weapons, testing communications equipment. These were the best of the best agents who'd proven themselves in countless operations, but tonight felt different. Tonight, they weren't just enforcing the law, they were reclaiming it. Detective Sarah Chen's message had changed everything. According to the intelligence Kim had gathered, she'd been trying to expose the Brotherhood from within for 2 years, gathering evidence, documenting meetings, but never finding anyone she could trust with the information. Her brother Derek's arrest in Atlanta had been her breaking point. She knew Ford was different. Knew he wouldn't be bought or intimidated. "She's taking an enormous risk," Agent Torres said as they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Birmingham. "If the Brotherhood discovers she's helping us..." "They won't," Ford said firmly, "because we're going to move too fast for them to react." The warehouse sat on the outskirts of Birmingham's industrial district, a hulking structure of corrugated metal and broken windows that looked abandoned from the outside. But thermal imaging showed 53 heat signatures inside, and electronic surveillance had picked up scrambled radio communications for the past 3 hours. Ford's earpiece crackled. "Director, this is Chen. I'm inside. They're discussing retaliation strategies. They want to target your family first, make an example. Copy that. Your safety is priority one. If things go bad, you get out. Understood. Wait, someone new just arrived. Oh my God. Director, it's Assistant Attorney General Blackwood. Ford's blood ran cold. Thomas Blackwood was Patterson's deputy, had access to everything. If he was Brotherhood. All units, we go in 2 minutes, Ford commanded. This is bigger than we thought. The warehouse erupted into chaos as FBI agents breached from every entrance simultaneously. Flashbang grenades disoriented the gathered Brotherhood members, most of whom were reaching for weapons they'd never get to use. Ford moved through the smoke like an avenging angel, his voice cutting through the confusion. FBI, nobody move hands where we can see them. The Brotherhood members, caught completely off guard, found themselves surrounded by federal agents with automatic weapons. Some tried to run only to find every exit blocked. Others dropped to their knees immediately, knowing the game was over. Assistant Attorney General Blackwood stood frozen in the center of the room, his face a mask of shock and rage. Ford, you have no authority here. Actually, I do, Ford said, holding up a warrant. Signed by a federal judge an hour ago. You're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and about 30 other charges we'll sort out later. As agents began cuffing the Brotherhood members, Ford noticed one trying to destroy something, a laptop probably containing their entire network. He moved quickly, securing the device before it could be damaged. You think you've won? Blackwood spat as he was handcuffed. You have no idea how deep this goes. We have people everywhere, Congress, the Pentagon, even your precious FBI. Then we'll find them all, Ford said simply. One by one if necessary. Sarah Chen emerged from the crowd, her cover intact until the last moment. She handed Ford a flash drive. 3 years of recordings, Director. Every meeting, every plan, every member. You're a hero, Detective. No, she said, looking at the arrested Brotherhood members, many of whom were staring at her with murderous rage. I'm just a cop who remembered why she became one. The processing took hours. 53 arrests, including 3 police chiefs, 2 judges, 4 prosecutors, and Blackwood. The media had gathered outside, alerted by someone Ford suspected, Sarah Chen, giving the story the spotlight it needed. As the sun rose over Birmingham, Ford stood before the cameras, exhausted but determined. The questions came rapid fire. Director Ford, is it true you've uncovered a secret organization within law enforcement? Yes. The Brotherhood has been operating for at least 40 years, coordinating corruption, protecting criminal officers, and targeting anyone who threatened their power. How many members are there? We're still determining that, but initial estimates suggest over 1,000 nationwide. Isn't this just a witch hunt against police? Ford's eyes hardened. No. This is about officers who betrayed their oath, who used their badges to commit crimes rather than prevent them. The vast majority of law enforcement officers are good people doing a difficult job. The Brotherhood corrupted that, turned it into something ugly. A reporter from CNN pushed forward. Director Ford, there are reports that Officer Knox was murdered in federal custody. Can you confirm? Officer Knox's death is under investigation. What I can tell you is that someone wanted him silenced. That someone is now in custody. The revelation sent ripples through the crowd. Ford let it sink in before continuing. The American people deserve law enforcement they can trust. For too long, the Brotherhood and organizations like it have prevented that. As of today, that changes. What about the officers walking off the job in protest? They have the right to protest. But ask yourself, why would an honest officer protest the arrest of corrupt ones? Every officer who walks off the job will be investigated. If they're clean, they have nothing to fear. If they're not... Ford let the implication hang. Back at the FBI field office, the full scope of what they'd uncovered was becoming clear. The laptop Ford had saved contained the Brotherhood's entire database. Names, ranks, assignments. Even blackmail material they'd used to control politicians and judges. Jesus Christ! Agent Kim breathed as he scrolled through the files. They have dirt on half of Washington. Then half of Washington is about to get very uncomfortable, Ford replied. His phone rang. It was the president. Ford, I'm getting tremendous pressure to remove you. Senators, congressmen, people I thought I could trust. Mr. President, check the list I'm sending you now. See if any of those names are on it. There was a pause as the president reviewed the file. My God. Senator Richardson, Congressman Vail. These are people on the Intelligence Committee. Which is how the Brotherhood always stayed one step ahead. Mr. President, I need you to invoke emergency powers. We need to clean house, and we need to do it fast before they can regroup. Ford, what you're asking, it's unprecedented. So is the level of corruption we've uncovered. Mr. President, they murdered a federal witness. They've been planning assassinations. This isn't just corruption, it's domestic terrorism. A long silence. Then, you have whatever you need, but Ford. If this goes wrong, we both go down. I understand, sir. As Ford ended the call, Agent Morse approached with a tablet. Director, we have a problem. Social media is exploding. The Brotherhood had contingency plans. They're releasing edited videos, making it look like we planted evidence. Ford watched the videos spreading across Twitter and Facebook, sophisticated deep fakes showing FBI agents planting drugs and weapons. The comment sections were already filling with outrage calls for Ford's arrest, even death threats. How do we fight this? Morse asked. With truth, Ford said. Release everything. All the recordings Sarah Chen made, all the documents from the laptop, everything. Full transparency. Sir, that includes classified material. Then declassify it. The American people have a right to know how badly their trust was betrayed. The next 72 hours were a hurricane of activity. Arrests were made in 17 states. The Brotherhood's network began to collapse as members turned on each other trying to cut deals. The media struggled to keep up with the revelations, each one more shocking than the last. But the backlash was severe. In several cities, officers who weren't part of the Brotherhood but who resented federal interference began organizing. They called themselves the Constitutional Guard, claiming Ford was exceeding his authority. Ford was in his office reviewing arrest warrants when Agent Torres burst in. Sir, we have a situation in Dallas. The Constitutional Guard has surrounded our field office. They're not letting anyone in or out. How many? About 200 officers, some armed with military-grade weapons. Ford stood his decision, immediate. I'm going to Dallas. Sir, that's not safe. These are American law enforcement officers, not enemy combatants. I'm going to talk to them. The flight to Dallas was tense. Ford's security detail was on edge, knowing they were flying into a potential combat zone. But Ford remained calm, using the time to review files on the Constitutional Guard's leadership. The scene at the Dallas field office was surreal. Local and state police had formed a cordon around the federal building, their vehicles creating an improvised barrier. Media helicopters circled overhead, while crowds of civilians watched from behind police lines, some supporting the officers, others protesting against them. Ford's motorcade stopped just outside the cordon. He could see the officers tense as he stepped out. No bulletproof vest, no visible weapon, just his suit and his badge. I need to speak to whoever's in charge, he called out. A burly sergeant stepped forward. Sergeant Michael Kowalski, according to Ford's files. 28 years on the force, numerous commendations, no complaints. A good cop by all accounts. Director Ford, Kowalski said, his voice carefully neutral. We don't want violence, but we can't stand by while you destroy law enforcement. I'm not destroying law enforcement, Sergeant. I'm saving it. By arresting hundreds of officers. By arresting criminals who happen to be officers. Tell me, Sergeant, if a cop commits murder, should he be above the law? Kowalski shifted uncomfortably. Of course not, but nothing. The Brotherhood murdered Officer Knox. They were planning to murder civilians. They've been running drugs, taking bribes, destroying evidence. Are you defending that? We're defending due process. You're conducting mass arrests. Every person arrested has been charged with specific crimes backed by evidence. They'll get their day in court. That is due process. Ford stepped closer, and several officers raised their weapons slightly. Ford didn't flinch. Sergeant Kowalski, I know you're a good cop. 28 years of honorable service. Coached youth basketball in your off hours. Paid for groceries out of your own pocket for families who couldn't afford them. That's the kind of officer America needs. Kowalski blinked, surprised Ford knew these details. But the Brotherhood corrupted that. They made people afraid to be good cops, afraid to speak out against bad ones. They turned honor into weakness, and corruption into strength. Is that the law enforcement you want to defend? The sergeant was wavering. Ford could see it. Other officers were listening too, doubt creeping into their expressions. I'm not your enemy. Ford continued, addressing all of them now. The criminals hiding behind badges are, help me clean house. Help me restore honor to the profession you chose. A younger officer called out, how do we know you won't come after us next? Ford turned to him. Officer Martinez, isn't it 3 years on the force top of your academy class? Your partner was killed 6 months ago by a drug dealer who should have been in prison but walked because evidence mysteriously disappeared. That was the Brotherhood's doing. They let your partner's killer walk free because he was paying them. Martinez's face went white, then red with rage. But the rage wasn't directed at Ford. You want to honor your partner's memory? Ford asked. Help me ensure no other officer dies because of corruption. The standoff continued for another hour, but Ford could feel the tide turning. One by one, officers began stepping back, lowering their weapons. Finally, Kowalski made the decision. Stand down, he ordered. All units stand down. As the cordon dissolved, Kowalski approached Ford. We'll be watching you, Director. If you overstep, if you turn this into a real witch hunt, then you should stop me, Ford said. That's your job to protect and serve, even from federal overreach. But this isn't overreach. This is justice delayed, not denied. Back in Atlanta, Ford found his office full of updates. The Brotherhood's collapse was accelerating. Members were turning state's evidence in droves, each one providing information that led to more arrests. The network that had seemed invincible a week ago was crumbling. But there were casualties. 3 more officers connected to the Brotherhood had committed suicide rather than face arrest. 2 had fled the country. And in Chicago, a reform-minded police captain who'd been secretly helping the FBI was found dead, apparent retaliation from Brotherhood loyalists. Ford stood at his window, looking out at the city as night fell. Agent Morse approached with coffee and a status report. Director, we've identified over 800 Brotherhood members so far. Justice is preparing indictments for 600 of them. The others are cooperating. And the political fallout. Senator Richardson resigned an hour ago. Congressman Vail is claiming he was coerced, but the evidence says otherwise. The president is standing firm in his support, but he's taking heavy fire. Ford's phone buzzed. It was his daughter Alicia. Dad, I saw your speech in Dallas. The students here are calling you a hero. I told you I'm not a hero. Maybe not to yourself, but to us. Dad, do you know how many people have been waiting for someone to stand up to them, to say enough is enough? It shouldn't have taken this long. No, but it's happening now. That's what matters. After the call, Ford turned to Morse. How's my family? Safe. The protection details report no issues. Your wife wants to know when she can go home. Soon. Once we're sure the Brotherhood's retaliation capability is neutralized. There was a knock at the door. Agent Kim entered with a laptop. Director, you need to see this. On the screen was a video message posted on an encrypted forum known to be used by extremist groups. A figure in Shadow's voice distorted, but the message was clear. Director Ford thinks he's won. But the Brotherhood is an idea, not just an organization. You can arrest us, but you can't arrest the truth that law and order requires strength, requires us. The thin blue line isn't just a symbol, it's a reality. Without us, society collapses. And we're going to prove it. The video ended with a chilling promise. 7 days, Director. In 7 days you'll see what happens when the Guardians abandon their posts. They're planning something, Kim said. Ford studied the video, his mind analyzing every word. Not planning. They've already done it. This is a declaration, not a threat. What do you mean? They're going to orchestrate a crime wave. Pull back protection from certain areas, let chaos reign, then point to it as proof that their methods were necessary. Can they do that? If they still have enough people in place. Yes, we need to identify every major city where Brotherhood members are still active and not yet arrested. Morse, get me a list. As his team scrambled into action, Ford's phone rang. It was Judge Wells calling from protective custody. Director, I remembered something. The Brotherhood had contingency plans for if they were ever exposed. They called it Operation Chaos. They would deliberately allow crime to spike in select cities, then blame it on reform efforts. Which cities? Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, St. Louis, and Atlanta. Ford's blood chilled. His own city was a target. When? It was supposed to start gradually build over a week. Small things at first, response times, delayed evidence, mishandled patrol routes abandoned. Then escalate to complete withdrawal from high crime areas. Forcing us to either accept chaos or beg them to return to their old methods. Exactly. Ford hung up and immediately called the Atlanta Police Chief Sandra Williams, one of the few high-ranking officers he knew was clean. Chief Williams, we have a problem. The Brotherhood is planning to sabotage public safety in Atlanta. I've already noticed irregularities, Director. Officers calling in sick who aren't patrol cars breaking down that shouldn't, response times doubling in certain neighborhoods. Can you maintain order? Not with the resources I have. I need help. Ford made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Chief, I'm federalizing law enforcement in Atlanta temporarily. FBI agents will supplement your patrols. We're not taking over, we're partnership. The union will go ballistic. Let them. Public safety comes first. Over the next 48 hours, Ford implemented similar measures in all 5 targeted cities. FBI agents, DEA agents, even ATF agents were pressed into patrol duty. It was unprecedented, probably unconstitutional, definitely controversial. But it worked. Crime didn't spike. The Brotherhood's plan failed, but the political cost was severe. Protesters surrounded FBI headquarters, some supporting Ford, others demanding his resignation. Cable news was wall-to-wall coverage of the constitutional crisis, with talking heads debating whether Ford had become the very authoritarian he claimed to be fighting. The president called him in for a face-to-face meeting. Elijah, I'm taking tremendous heat. The Attorney General is talking about appointing a special prosecutor to investigate you. Patterson is talking about investigating me. Ford couldn't hide his surprise. She says you've exceeded your authority, that federalizing local law enforcement without congressional approval is illegal. Mr. President, we prevented massive civil unrest. If the Brotherhood's plan had succeeded, I know what you prevented, but perception matters in politics, and right now the perception is that you're out of control. Ford stood straighter. Then fire me. The president blinked. What? If you've lost confidence in me, fire me. But if you haven't, then back me. Publicly, unequivocally. Because the Brotherhood is counting on political pressure to stop us. They're counting on cowardice disguised as caution. The president was quiet for a long moment, studying Ford. You're willing to lose everything for this. Mr. President, a week ago I sat in a courtroom while officers laughed at me because they thought I was just another black man they could abuse. That happens every day in America. If I can't change that, with all the power of my position, then what good is that position? The president stood, walked to the window of the Oval Office. My approval rating has dropped 15 points since you started this operation. History won't remember approval ratings. It will remember whether we stood up to corruption or let it flourish. You're asking me to risk my presidency. I'm asking you to use it for something that matters. The president turned back to Ford. You have my full support. But Elijah, end this quickly. The country can't take much more division. As Ford left the White House, his phone was buzzing with updates. More arrests, more revelations, more chaos. But also something else, messages of support from officers around the country. Cops who'd been waiting for someone to clean house, who'd been sickened by what their profession had become. One message stood out from a rookie officer in Portland. Director Ford, I became a cop to help people. The Brotherhood made me ashamed to wear the badge. Thank you for reminding me why I put it on in the first place. Ford returned to Atlanta to find a surprise waiting in his office. Derek Chen, the officer whose arrest had started everything. Director Ford, Chen said, standing nervously, I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to say something. You're out on bail. My sister posted it. She told me what she did helping you. I'm ashamed it took my arrest to see what we'd become. What do you want, Officer Chen? To help, to make amends. I know things, people, connections. I want to cooperate fully. Ford studied the young officer. You'll likely still face jail time. I know, but maybe I can do some good first. Agent Kim will take your statement, everything you know, every detail. As Chen was led away, Agent Torres approached. Director, we've received intelligence about a Brotherhood meeting tonight. The last of the leadership trying to coordinate a response. Where? Here in Atlanta, a judge's home, Marcus Thornberry. He's hosting what he's calling a legal strategy session, but our surveillance indicates it's Brotherhood leadership. Judge Thornberry. He sentenced 3 innocent men to death over his career. All 3 were exonerated after execution. He's untouchable legally. Statute of limitations, judicial immunity. Maybe legally untouchable, Ford said, but not untouchable. We go tonight. Full surveillance record, everything. If they're planning crimes, we take them down. If not, at least we'll know who they are. That night, Ford personally led the surveillance operation. The judge's mansion in Buckhead was lit up like a Christmas tree, expensive cars filling the circular drive. Through long-range microphones, they could hear the conversation inside. Ford has destroyed everything we built, Thornberry's voice carried clearly. 40 years of work gone in a week. We can rebuild, another voice said. Wait for the political winds to change for Ford to make a mistake. No, a third voice, younger, angrier. We need to act now. Ford has a weakness, his family. His daughter specifically. Ford's blood turned to ice. You're talking about kidnapping a federal agent's daughter. Thornberry sounded skeptical. I'm talking about leverage. Ford backs off or she disappears. That's terrorism, someone protested. That's survival, the angry voice shot back. Ford had heard enough. All units move in now. The raid was swift and decisive. FBI agents stormed the mansion from all sides, catching the Brotherhood leadership mid-conspiracy. The looks on their faces when they saw Ford himself leading the charge was almost worth everything. Judge Thornberry, Ford said as the man was handcuffed. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping of a federal agent's family member. You can't prove. Ford held up a recording device. Every word, Your Honor. Every criminal word. As the last of the Brotherhood's leadership was led away, Ford stood in Thornberry's opulent living room, looking at the pictures on the walls. Judges, politicians, police chiefs, all smiling, all part of the network that had corrupted justice for decades. Agent Morse appeared at his elbow. Director, that's it. We've got them all. The Brotherhood is finished. No, Ford said quietly. The Brotherhood as an organization is finished, but the attitudes that created it, the systems that allowed it to flourish, those are still there. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. His phone rang. It was his wife. Elijah, the news is saying it's over. Can we come home? Yes, Ford said, feeling exhaustion hit him all at once. Come home. As dawn broke over Atlanta, Ford stood on the roof of the FBI building, looking out over the city. The protests had ended. The crisis had passed, but the real work was just beginning. The city below was waking up to a new reality, One where the badge no longer guaranteed immunity, where corruption had consequences. But Ford knew better than to declare victory. The Brotherhood might be broken, but the culture that spawned it remained lurking in precinct locker rooms and courthouse chambers across the nation. His phone vibrated with a text from Agent Kim. "Director, we have a situation. Former Officer Bradley Knox's widow is here. She insists on speaking with you." Ford made his way down to the lobby where Margaret Knox waited, a small woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. She clutched a manila envelope to her chest like a life preserver. "Mrs. Knox," Ford said gently, "I'm sorry for your loss." She laughed bitterly. "Are you? My husband is dead because of you." "Your husband is dead because someone in the Brotherhood killed him to keep him quiet." "I know," she said, surprising him. "That's why I'm here." She handed him the envelope. Inside were documents, photos, and a flash drive. "Bradley was many things," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "Racist, corrupt, cruel. But he was also paranoid. He kept records of everything, insurance against the Brotherhood turning on him. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should destroy these. But after watching what you did this week, after seeing the truth come out, I couldn't." Ford examined the documents quickly. They were explosive names of Brotherhood members in federal agencies, including 2 FBI assistant directors, a deputy U.S. Marshal, and 3 federal prosecutors. "Mrs. Knox, this is evidence of federal crimes. Why bring it to me instead of destroying it like your husband wanted?" She met his eyes, and he saw decades of pain there. "Because I have a son, 23 years old, about to graduate from the police academy. He idolized his father until this week, until he saw what Bradley really was. He called me crying," Director Ford said. "He didn't know if he could be a cop anymore, knowing what his father had done." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that's exactly why he needs to be a cop. To be better. To be what his father should have been." She wiped her eyes. "Use those documents. Clean house. Give my son a chance to wear the badge with pride." As Margaret Knox left, Ford called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. The revelations in Knox's files meant the Brotherhood had penetrated even the FBI itself. The cancer was deeper than anyone had imagined. "We need to handle this carefully," Agent Torres said, reviewing the files. "If we move against FBI personnel, it could tear the Bureau apart." "It's already torn," Ford replied. "We're just acknowledging it. Morse, I want surveillance on both assistant directors immediately. Kim, dig into these prosecutors' case histories. Look for patterns of dropped charges, lost evidence, anything suspicious." His phone rang. It was President Morrison. "Ford, I've got senators calling for your head. They're saying you've turned the FBI into your personal army." "Which senators?" "Richardson's allies, Peters, Blackstone, Nguyen." Ford pulled up Knox's files on his tablet, searched quickly. "Mr. President, all 3 of those senators received campaign contributions from shell companies connected to the Brotherhood. They're compromised." Silence on the other end. Then, "Jesus Christ, Elijah, how deep does this go?" "All the way to the top, sir. But we're going to dig it out, root and stem." "The political cost will be whatever it is. Mr. President, we can't stop now. We're past the point of no return." After the president hung up, Ford found himself facing a new crisis. Agent Morse had just received intelligence that Brotherhood sympathizers were planning simultaneous attacks on FBI field offices in 6 cities. "Not attacks," Ford corrected, studying the intelligence. "Demonstrations. They want to provoke us into overreacting, create martyrs. Order all field offices to stand down unless lives are in immediate danger. Let them protest. Sir, if they breach, they won't. These aren't terrorists, they're cops who've lost their way. They want confrontation. We won't give it to them." The demonstrations began that afternoon. Hundreds of off-duty officers surrounded FBI buildings in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Miami, and Seattle. They carried signs reading, "Ford Eels Tyranny," and "Defend the Thin Blue Line." Media coverage was instant and intense. Ford watched from his office as CNN interviewed one of the protesters, a sergeant from NYPD. Director Ford has declared war on law enforcement, the sergeant said. He's criminalizing the difficult decisions we make every day to keep people safe. The reporter pushed back. But the Brotherhood was documented to be involved in murder, drug trafficking, and corruption. That's Ford's narrative. Where's the proof? Where are the trials he's convicted us in the media without due process? Ford turned to Morse. Release the recordings. All of them. Every Brotherhood meeting Sarah Chen recorded, every confession we've obtained. Let the public hear for themselves. Sir, that could compromise ongoing prosecutions. Or it could ensure justice by making it impossible to ignore the truth. Do it. Within hours, the recordings were everywhere. The Brotherhood's own words, their own plans, their casual discussions of murder and frame-ups. The protest crowds began to thin as officers heard their colleagues' voices plotting crimes. But the most devastating recording was the last one. Ford released a Brotherhood leadership meeting from 2 years ago, where they discussed the necessity of killing reform-minded officers who wouldn't play ball. They mentioned names. 3 of those names belonged to officers who had died in accidents or random crimes over the following months. The effect was immediate. The protests collapsed. Officers who'd been defending the Brotherhood went silent. The narrative shifted from Ford's war on cops to how many good cops did the Brotherhood kill? That evening, Ford received a visitor he hadn't expected. Rebecca Thornton, the prosecutor from his trial. Director Ford, she said, standing uncomfortably in his office. I owe you an apology. You were doing your job. No, I was enjoying it. Enjoying the power, the ability to destroy someone's life with words and selective evidence. She sat down heavily. I've been reviewing my cases since your trial. Do you know how many innocent people I've probably sent to prison? How many times I ignored exculpatory evidence because it didn't fit my narrative? What do you want, Ms. Thornton? To make amends. I'm resigning from the prosecutor's office. I want to work for the Innocence Project, help undo some of the damage I've done. Ford studied her for a long moment. That's admirable. But you could do more good staying where you are, prosecuting the right people for the right reasons. After what I did to you, because of what you did to me, you understand now how power can corrupt, how easy it is to mistake conviction for justice. That knowledge makes you valuable. Thornton left with much to think about, and Ford turned his attention to a new problem. The 2 FBI assistant directors named in Knox's files, Harrison and Valdez, had disappeared. They knew we were coming, Kim reported. Cleaned out their offices, destroyed their hard drives. We have bolos out, but they're trained agents. They know how to disappear. They'll surface, Ford said. Rats always do when they think the coast is clear. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. Dad, I'm proud of you. The whole campus is talking about what you've done. My professors are using it as a case study in ethical leadership. Ford smiled, the first genuine smile he'd allowed himself in days. But it faded as Agent Torres rushed in with urgent news. Director, we've got a hostage situation. Baltimore. Brotherhood sympathizers have taken over a police station holding reform-minded officers hostage. They're demanding you personally come negotiate. Ford was already moving, grabbing his vest. How many hostages? 12 officers and 3 civilians who were in the building. Demands, your resignation, amnesty for all Brotherhood members, and safe passage out of the country. The flight to Baltimore took 40 minutes, during which Ford coordinated with local SWAT and FBI tactical teams. The police station was surrounded, media helicopters circling overhead like vultures. The lead hostage-taker had been identified as Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a 30-year veteran with deep Brotherhood ties who'd somehow avoided arrest in the initial sweep. Ford approached the station with a bullhorn. Lieutenant Webb, this is Director Ford. I'm here. Let's talk. Webb appeared at a window holding a gun to the head of a young female officer. You destroyed everything we built, 40 years of maintaining order, keeping the animals in check, protecting decent people. You mean protecting yourselves, Ford replied. Let the hostages go. You have me here, that's what you wanted. I want you to admit what you've done. You've weakened law enforcement, emboldened criminals, destroyed the thin blue line. Ford set down the bullhorn and walked closer, hands visible. Lieutenant, you're holding fellow officers hostage. How does that protect anyone? They're traitors, reform supporters, diversity hires, weakness in the ranks. The young officer Webb was holding spoke up, her voice carrying despite the gun at her head. I became a cop to protect people, not to be part of your racist gang. Webb pressed the gun harder against her temple. Shut up! Ford took another step forward. Lieutenant, you have a choice. Release the hostages and face justice with dignity, or become everything you claim to stand against a cop killer. I'm already dead, Webb screamed. You killed me when you destroyed the Brotherhood, my pension, my reputation, my life's work, all gone. Your life's work was corruption and murder. My life's work was maintaining order, keeping the streets safe, by selling drugs, by killing innocent people, by protecting criminals who paid you. Ford's voice rose. You betrayed everything that badge represents. Webb was crying now, the gun shaking in his hand. We were warriors. We were the line between civilization and chaos. No, Ford said firmly. You were criminals with badges. The real warriors are the officers you're holding hostage, the ones who refuse to be corrupted, who maintain their honor despite pressure from people like you. The standoff stretched for another hour. Ford slowly talking Webb down, appealing to whatever shred of honor remained in the man. Finally, Webb released the hostages and surrendered, collapsing in tears as he was arrested. The young officer Webb had held hostage approached Ford as she was being checked by paramedics. Thank you, Director. I'm Officer Patricia Chen, Sarah Chen's cousin. Another Chen standing up to corruption. It runs in the family, sir. My whole family, we came here from Taiwan believing in American justice. People like Webb made us question that belief. You've restored it. Back in Atlanta, Ford found his office full of updates. The recordings had done their work. Public opinion had shifted decisively. The Brotherhood members in custody were turning on each other, each trying to cut the best deal. The organization was eating itself. But there were still loose ends. Assistant directors Harrison and Valdez were still missing. Several high-ranking Brotherhood members had fled the country. And most concerning intelligence suggested some Brotherhood sympathizers were going underground, forming new cells, learning from the old organization's mistakes. Ford was reviewing these reports when Agent Morse knocked urgently. Director, you need to see this. She led him to the surveillance room where monitors showed feeds from around the country. In dozens of cities, spontaneous demonstrations were occurring. But these weren't protests against Ford, they were celebrations. Communities that had suffered under corrupt policing were celebrating in the streets. In Chicago's South Side, residents were dancing and singing. In Los Angeles, lowriders cruised in parade formation. In New York, someone had projected Ford's image onto the side of a building with the words, "Justice at last," beneath it. They're thanking you, Morse said softly. Ford watched the celebrations with mixed feelings. They're thanking the system for finally working. That's what they should be celebrating. Not me, but the fact that the law applied to those who thought they were above it. His phone rang. It was his wife, Monica. Elijah, are you watching the news? I'm seeing it. You did this. You gave them hope. I did my job. No, baby, you did more than that. You proved that power can be used for good, that one person in the right position can make a difference. After the call, Ford walked through the FBI building, noting the way agents looked at him now with respect, yes, but also with awe and a little fear. He'd shaken the foundations of law enforcement, had shown that no one was untouchable. It was necessary, but it had also created uncertainty. He found Agent Kim in the data center still analyzing Brotherhood files. Director, I've found something significant. The Brotherhood had a training program bringing in young officers and indoctrinating them. They called it the Academy. Where? Multiple locations, but the main one was in Montana, an old military base they'd purchased through shell companies. Status: abandoned 3 days ago when news of the arrests broke. But sir, their records indicate over 2,000 officers went through that program over the past decade. 2,000 officers trained in Brotherhood methods still out there. The work was far from over. That night, Ford attended a meeting with police chiefs from major cities across the country. These were the clean ones, the reformers, the ones who'd been fighting the Brotherhood from within. Chief Sandra Williams from Atlanta spoke first. Director Ford, what you've done has given us an opportunity we've never had before. The chance to truly reform law enforcement. But we need guidance support. You'll have it, Ford promised. We're establishing a new federal oversight program, not to control local law enforcement, but to support it. Training programs, accountability measures, community engagement initiatives. Chief Robert Taylor from Portland raised a concern. The unions are pushing back hard. They're saying we're demonizing all cops for the actions of a few. Then we need to show them that accountability protects good cops, Ford replied. Every corrupt officer makes the job harder and more dangerous for honest ones. The Brotherhood didn't just victimize civilians, they victimized every decent cop who had to work alongside them. The meeting continued for hours, planning the future of American law enforcement. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but necessary. As Ford was leaving, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. You think you've won, but the Brotherhood was just one head of the Hydra. Cut one off, 2 more grow back. We're watching. We're waiting. We're learning from your tactics. This isn't over. The new order. Ford showed it to Morse, who immediately began trying to trace it. Sir, should we be concerned? Always be concerned, Ford replied. Corruption doesn't die, it evolves. The Brotherhood is finished, but something else will try to take its place. Our job is to be ready. The next morning brought unexpected news. Assistant Director Harrison had been found dead in a hotel room in Mexico City, apparent suicide. He'd left a note. I was a good agent once. The Brotherhood made me forget that. Tell Ford he was right. We became the very thing we swore to fight against. Valdez was captured the same day trying to board a ship to South America. He was defiant, claiming Ford had destroyed American law enforcement, that crime would soar without the Brotherhood's methods. We'll see, Ford told him during interrogation. We'll see if treating people with respect and following the law actually works better than your reign of terror. As the week ended, Ford stood in the same courtroom where his ordeal had begun. Judge Wells's replacement, Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to the corrupt captain, had asked him to address a gathering of new prosecutors and public defenders. A week ago, Ford began, I sat in that defendant's chair while officers of the law mocked me, judged me, found me guilty before a single word of evidence was presented. They did this because they could, because the system allowed it, because they believed their badges made them superior. He looked at the young lawyers, all fresh-faced and idealistic. Each of you will face moments when you can abuse your power, when you can destroy someone because you don't like them, or they look different, or they challenge your authority. In those moments, remember that justice isn't about winning or losing, it's about truth. It's about treating every person who enters this courtroom as a human being deserving of fairness. A young prosecutor raised her hand. Director Ford, how do we change a system that's been corrupt for so long? One case at a time, Ford answered. One ethical decision at a time. You change it by refusing to participate in its corruption, by calling out wrongdoing when you see it, by remembering that the law should protect everyone equally. As he left the courthouse, Ford noticed Officer Marcus Williams, the young public defender who'd tried to defend him, now wearing a federal prosecutor's badge. You took my advice, Ford noted. You showed me that the system can work if good people fight for it, Williams replied. I want to be one of those people. Ford's phone rang. It was the president. Elijah, I have some news. Congress is forming a commission to investigate law enforcement reform. They want you to testify. When? Tomorrow. Are you ready? Ford looked out at the city, at the people going about their lives most unaware of how close the system had come to complete corruption. "I'm ready, Mr. President. The truth needs to be told, all of it." That evening, Ford returned home for the first time since the crisis began. His family was there, Monica Alicia home from Howard, and his son Marcus, a software engineer who'd flown in from Seattle. "Dad," Marcus said, "I've been writing algorithms to analyze police data, looking for patterns that might indicate corruption. Want to see?" They spent the evening as a family, but Ford couldn't fully relax. The encrypted message about the new order haunted him. The Brotherhood was broken, but its ideology survived in too many hearts and minds. Monica found him on the porch at midnight, staring at the stars. "Can't sleep. Too much to process. You did something incredible, Elijah. You stood up to an entire system of corruption and won." "Did I win?" Ford asked. "Or did I just expose how deep the problem goes? For every Brotherhood member we arrested, how many sympathizers are still out there? How many are waiting for their chance?" Monica took his hand. "Then you keep fighting. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. What if I'm not enough? What if the system is too broken to fix? Then you inspired others to continue the fight. Look at the young officers celebrating in the streets, the prosecutors rethinking their methods, the communities that finally have hope. You lit a fire, Elijah. That fire will keep burning even if you're not there to tend it." Ford squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her presence. Tomorrow he would testify before Congress would lay bare the full scope of the Brotherhood's corruption. There would be resistance, political maneuvering attempts to minimize what had happened. But the truth was out now, impossible to stuff back into its box. His phone buzzed one last time. A message from Sarah Chen. "Director, my brother Derek just graduated from his ethics retraining program. He wanted me to tell you he understands now what being a cop really means. He's ready to earn back the right to wear the badge. Thank you for giving him that chance." Ford smiled. Maybe that was the real victory, not destroying the Brotherhood, but creating space for redemption, for change, for a new generation of law enforcement that understood service over power. The Capitol building loomed before Ford as his motorcade approached through the early morning Washington drizzle. The weight of what he was about to do, pressed on his shoulders, testifying before Congress, would either solidify the reforms or give his enemies the ammunition to destroy everything he'd built. Agent Morse sat beside him in the car, reviewing notes. "Sir, Senator Blackstone will likely lead the opposition. He's already been on 3 morning shows calling your actions unconstitutional." "Blackstone took $200,000 from Brotherhood shell companies," Ford replied calmly. "He's fighting for his survival." As they entered the building, Ford noticed the unusual security presence. Capitol Police were everywhere, their faces tense. Something was off. The hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Every major news outlet had cameras rolling. The gallery was filled with a mixture of supporters and detractors. Reformed officers on one side, Brotherhood sympathizers on the other. The tension was palpable, electric, dangerous. Senator Patricia Hayes, the committee chair, called the session to order. "Director Ford, you're here to explain your recent actions, which some have called the most significant law enforcement operation in American history, and others have labeled as an unprecedented abuse of power." Ford leaned toward the microphone. "Senator Hayes, I'm here to tell the truth about a cancer that has been eating away at American law enforcement for decades." Before he could continue, Senator Blackstone interrupted. "Director Ford, isn't it true that you allowed yourself to be arrested wasting taxpayer resources on a sham trial just to entrap honest officers?" "Senator, I was preventing a bombing that would have killed 37 officers. The fact that those same officers chose to mock and abuse me thinking I was powerless revealed their true character." "So you admit to entrapment?" "I admit to doing my job. If those officers had treated me with the basic dignity required by law, there would have been no issue. They chose to reveal their corruption. I simply gave them the opportunity." The hearing continued for hours, with Ford methodically laying out the evidence against the Brotherhood. He showed organizational charts, financial records, murder conspiracies. Several senators who'd been attacking him grew notably quiet as evidence of their own connections to the Brotherhood appeared on the screens. Then, just as Ford was explaining the Brotherhood's infiltration of federal agencies, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Capitol Police immediately moved to secure the exits, but Ford could already hear it gunfire somewhere in the building. "Everybody down!" someone screamed. The doors burst open. Men in tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised. But these weren't Capitol Police or FBI. Their patches read New Order. The lead gunman pulled off his mask, revealing Assistant Director Valdez, who was supposed to be in federal custody. Surprised Ford. Valdez smiled coldly. "You thought you'd destroyed us, but you just forced us to evolve. The Brotherhood was old complacent. The New Order is lean, dedicated, and absolutely committed to restoring proper order." Ford stood slowly, hands visible. "How did you escape?" "We have people everywhere, Director. Guards, judges, senators." Valdez gestured with his weapon. "Half the Capitol Police on duty today are ours. This building is sealed. No one in or out until our demands are met." "Which are?" "Your public confession that you fabricated evidence against the Brotherhood, your resignation, and amnesty for all arrested members." Ford looked around the room. Senators cowered under desks. Camera operators continued filming despite the danger. This was being broadcast live to the entire nation. "You're taking members of Congress hostage on live television," Ford said. "You've just proven everything I've said about you." "We're patriots taking back our country from a tyrant," Valdez countered. "You've weakened America, Ford. Crime is already rising in cities where you've removed our people. Crime is rising because your people are orchestrating it to prove a point." Valdez's smile widened. "Prove it." Ford reached slowly into his jacket. Several guns swung toward him, but he pulled out only his phone. "Agent Morse, are you receiving this?" Morse's voice came through the speaker, clear in the silent room. "Yes, Director. We have teams surrounding the building. Play file 77 Alpha." The phone's speaker came alive with Valdez's own voice, recorded 3 days ago in what he'd thought was a secure location. "Once we take the Capitol, we'll have leverage. The sleeper cells will activate, crime will spike, and the public will beg for the old ways back. Ford will be seen as the villain who destroyed public safety." Valdez's face went white. That's fake. Deep fake technology." "It's your voice, Valdez, your plan. Recorded by one of your own people who chose justice over corruption." One of the gunmen lowered his weapon slightly. "Valdez, you said this was about restoring honor." "Shut up," Valdez screamed. "It is about honor, about maintaining the order that keeps society from collapsing." Senator Hayes, surprisingly calm under her desk, spoke up. "Mr. Valdez, I've been reviewing Director Ford's evidence for the past 3 hours. The Brotherhood murdered innocent people. How is that maintaining order?" "Casualties of war," Valdez replied. "Every war has them." "This isn't a war," Ford said, taking a step forward. "This is a crime. You're criminals hiding behind ideology. The Brotherhood didn't protect anyone, they protected themselves." The sound of helicopters grew louder outside. Through the windows, FBI tactical vehicles could be seen surrounding the building. Valdez grew more agitated. "They won't breach, not with senators as hostages." "You're right," Ford said. "They won't need to, because your own people are going to surrender." "Never. Look at them, Valdez. Really, look at them." Valdez glanced at his team. Several were exchanging uncertain looks. These were cops, or had been. Taking Congress hostage, threatening senators, this wasn't what they'd signed up for. Ford addressed them directly. "Officers, I know you believe in law and order. I know you think I've destroyed something important. But look what you're doing. You're holding guns on elected officials. You're terrorizing innocent people. Is this the thin blue line you swore to uphold? One of the gunmen, younger than the others, spoke up. Valdez said we were just going to demonstrate show strength. Quiet! Valdez pointed his weapon at his own man. That was the breaking point. Several of the New Order members immediately turned their weapons on Valdez. Lower the gun, sir. One said, his voice shaking. This has gone too far. The standoff within a standoff lasted only seconds. Valdez, seeing he'd lost control, made a desperate move toward Senator Blackstone, perhaps thinking a high-value hostage would save him. Ford moved faster than anyone expected for a man his age, tackling Valdez before he could reach the senator. The two men crashed to the floor, wrestling for control of Valdez's weapon. The gun went off the bullet, shattering a window. Then Ford had control his FBI training, overwhelming Valdez's desperate fury. As Capitol Police and FBI agents flooded the room, the New Order members surrendered one by one, laying down their weapons. Most looked relieved. Senator Blackstone helped to his feet by an agent pointed at Ford. This man caused all of this, if he hadn't started his witch hunt. Senator Blackstone, Ford interrupted, still holding Valdez down. You might want to remain silent. We have recordings of your calls with Valdez planning this operation. Blackstone's face went ashen. I want my lawyer. As Valdez and his conspirators were led away, Senator Hayes called the hearing back to order despite the blown-out window and overturned furniture. Director Ford, she said, her voice shaky but determined. I think you've more than proven your point about corruption in law enforcement. This committee will be recommending full support for your reform initiatives. The gallery erupted in mixed reactions, cheers from reform supporters, angry shouts from Brotherhood sympathizers. Ford stood at the microphone one more time. What happened here today was not about me, he said, his voice carrying over the noise. It was about a diseased ideology making its last desperate grab for power. The New Order. The Brotherhood. Whatever they call themselves, they represent the past. A past where badges meant immunity, where power meant privilege, where justice was selective. He looked directly at the cameras. To the officers watching, you have a choice. Embrace reform and be part of building something better, or cling to corruption and be swept away by history. Choose wisely. As Ford left the Capitol, Morse was waiting with urgent news. Director, we've had 17 more New Order cells surrender nationwide in the last hour. Seeing their leadership attack Congress broke their resolve. And the others? Still tracking 3 cells that have gone dark. But sir, there's something else. President Morrison wants to see you immediately. The ride to the White House was surreal. The streets were filled with people who'd been watching the hearing live. Some cheered Ford's motorcade, others shouted condemnations. America was divided, but the lines were clearer now. Those who wanted justice for all versus those who wanted privilege for some. President Morrison was in the Oval Office with the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security. Elijah, the President began. What happened today changes everything. Attacking Congress, taking senators hostage, the New Order just validated everything you've been saying. They also showed how deep the problem goes, Ford replied. Half the Capitol Police on duty were compromised. How many other agencies are infiltrated? Attorney General Patterson nodded grimly. We're initiating a comprehensive review of all federal law enforcement. Background checks, polygraphs, the works. That's not enough, Ford said. We need cultural change, not just security measures. We need to rebuild law enforcement from the ground up. The president leaned back in his chair. What are you proposing? A new federal training academy. Mandatory for all law enforcement, federal and local. 6 months of ethics training, community relations, de-escalation techniques. Anyone who wants to wear a badge goes through it. The unions will revolt. Then we'll decertify the unions that stand in the way of reform. Secretary of Homeland Security James Crawford shook his head. That's authoritarian, Ford. No, it's necessary. The unions have protected corrupt cops for decades. They've made it nearly impossible to fire bad officers. That ends now. The debate continued for hours. Ford laid out a comprehensive plan, federal oversight of all police departments, civilian review boards, with actual power mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off and a national database of officer misconduct. This will cost billions, Patterson pointed out. What's the cost of allowing corruption to flourish? Ford countered. How many innocent people have died because bad cops were protected? How many communities have been destroyed? How much trust has been lost? The president finally made his decision. Do it. Draft the legislation. I'll push it through Congress while we have momentum. As Ford left the White House, his phone rang. It was his daughter, Alicia. Dad, I saw what happened at the Capitol. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. The students here are organizing support rallies. They're calling you a hero. I'm not. Dad, stop. You are a hero. You stood up to armed terrorists in the Capitol. You've taken on an entire corrupt system. You've given people hope. That's heroic. After the call, Ford returned to FBI headquarters to find a surprise. Hundreds of officers from around the country had gathered outside, not to protest, but to support reform. They held signs reading, "Good cops against corruption," and "The Brotherhood doesn't represent us." Officer Patricia Chen was among them, now wearing sergeant's stripes. Director Ford, we wanted you to know the majority of us support what you're doing. We're tired of being tarred by the actions of the corrupt few. Ford addressed the crowd impromptu. Each of you represents what law enforcement should be. Protectors, servants, guardians of justice for all. The Brotherhood tried to corrupt that ideal. You're here to reclaim it. Inside his office, Ford found Williams, the former public defender turned prosecutor, waiting with a thick file. Director, I've been reviewing cases prosecuted by Brotherhood-connected attorneys. There are hundreds of wrongful convictions, people serving life sentences for crimes they didn't commit. Then we fix it. Every case gets reviewed. Every innocent person goes free. It'll empty half the prisons. Then we'll empty half the prisons. Justice delayed is better than justice denied forever. That evening, Ford was working late when Morse entered with a decrypt of New Order communications. Sir, they're planning something called Operation Phoenix. Details are sparse, but it involves October 15th, that's next week. Ford studied the fragments of intelligence. They're going to try to rise from the ashes of the Brotherhood literally. Probably a coordinated attack on reform supporters. Should we go public? No. Let them think we don't know. But increase protection on all potential targets. And I want surveillance on every known New Order sympathizer. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. Ford answered warily. Director Ford. The voice was elderly, trembling. This is Judge Patricia Brennan, the one who had drugs planted in her car 5 years ago. Judge Brennan, where are you? In hiding. But I want to come forward. I have evidence about the Brotherhood going back 20 years. Documents I've been collecting waiting for someone like you. Ford arranged for her immediate protection and extraction. Judge Brennan's evidence proved invaluable names, dates, and detailed accounts of judicial corruption that reached the Supreme Court itself. 3 days later, Ford stood before a joint session of Congress, invited to address the nation about the path forward. My fellow Americans, he began, the words echoing in the packed chamber. We stand at a crossroads. We can choose to return to the old ways where corruption festered in darkness, where badges meant immunity, where justice was for sale. Or we can choose a different path. He paused, looking at the faces before him, some supportive, others hostile, many uncertain. The Brotherhood and their successors want you to believe that brutality equals strength, that corruption is necessary for order, that some lives matter more than others. They're wrong. True strength comes from justice. True order comes from fairness. True peace comes from treating every citizen with dignity. The speech continued for 30 minutes, laying out his vision for reformed law enforcement. When he finished, the applause was not universal. Many sat in stony silence, but it was genuine from those who clapped. Afterward, Ford found Senator Hayes waiting for him. "Director, the reform bill is going to pass. The attack on Congress guaranteed it. But there's something you should know." Senator Blackstone cut a deal. "He's giving up everything about the Brotherhood's political connections. In exchange for minimum security protective custody. He's terrified of what the Brotherhood might do to him." Ford nodded. "He should be. They don't tolerate traitors." October 15th arrived with heightened tension. Every federal building was on alert. Reform supporters had been moved to safe houses. Ford himself was in a secure command center, coordinating with field offices nationwide. At exactly noon, the attacks began, but not where expected. The new order didn't target buildings or individuals. They targeted infrastructure, power grids in major cities, communication networks, water treatment plants. It was sophisticated, coordinated, and devastating. As cities plunged into darkness, Ford realized the true plan. The new order was creating chaos to prove their point. Without their version of order, society would collapse. "They're trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy," Ford told his team. "Make things so bad that people beg for authoritarian control." "It's working," Kim reported. "Social media is full of people saying this wouldn't have happened if we hadn't arrested the Brotherhood." Ford made a decision that would define his legacy. "We're going public with everything. Every bit of evidence about the Brotherhood's crimes, every recording, every document. Full transparency. Sir, that includes classified materials. Then we declassify them. The American people deserve the truth." The information dump was massive, unprecedented. Websites crashed under the traffic as millions accessed the files. The evidence was undeniable, overwhelming, sickening. The Brotherhood's crimes laid bare for all to see. But Ford wasn't done. He appeared on every major network, simultaneously emergency broadcasts overriding regular programming. "The attacks happening now are not because we arrested the Brotherhood," he said, speaking directly to the camera. "They're happening because the Brotherhood's survivors are desperate. They're proving what we've said all along: they're terrorists, not protectors." He held up a tablet showing real-time responses. But look at what's also happening. In every affected city, citizens are helping each other. Real police officers, good ones, are maintaining order without brutality. Communities are coming together. We don't need the Brotherhood's version of order. We have something better: each other. The gambit worked. Instead of panicking, communities organized. Neighborhood watches formed. Good cops worked overtime without pay. The chaos the new order hoped to create turned into solidarity against them. Within 48 hours, the last new order cells were captured or surrendered. The power grids were restored. The crisis passed. Ford stood in his office looking out at the city lights returning to normal. Morse entered with a final report. "Director, it's over. The last new order leader was just arrested in Seattle. The Brotherhood. The new order, they're finished." "No," Ford said quietly. "The organizations are finished. But the ideology, the belief that power makes right, that violence equals strength, that will take generations to truly defeat." His phone rang. It was Monica. "Come home, Elijah. You've done enough for today. There's still so much work. There always will be. But tonight, come home. Your family needs to see you to know you're safe." Ford looked at his desk, covered with plans for reform investigations still ongoing, the endless work of justice. Then he picked up his coat. "Agent Morse, I'm going home. Tomorrow we continue building something better. Tonight I'm just going to be a husband and father." As he drove home, Ford passed through neighborhoods that had been war zones a week ago. Now children played in the streets. People sat on porches. Officers walked beats talking with residents instead of intimidating them. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was better. His phone buzzed with one last message. This time it was from Derek Chen, the officer whose arrest had started everything. "Director Ford, I graduated from the reform program today. They're giving me a second chance, letting me return to duty. I promise I won't waste it. I'll be the cop I should have been from the start. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." Ford smiled as he pulled into his driveway. The porch light was on, and through the window he could see his family waiting for him. The war against the Brotherhood was won, but the battle for justice would continue tomorrow and every day after. For tonight, though, he was just Elijah Ford, husband, father, and a man who had stood in a courtroom while they laughed at him and had chosen to respond not with vengeance but with justice. The system that had tried to break him had instead been broken and rebuilt by him. And in that rebuilding, America had found something it had lost, the promise that justice really could be blind, that power really could serve, instead of corrupt, that the law really could protect everyone equally. It was a promise that would need to be renewed every day, fought for against those who would corrupt it again. But for the first time in decades, it was a promise that seemed possible to keep.